it. All right, and we're live between London and Brooklyn. Hello, Dan.
Hello, Jean-Baptiste. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining. It's a real pleasure to see you. We got to know each other during the MIDI Innovation Awards, where you demonstrated. Well, you gave a piece using the technology that you are going to go through today, called Natural Machines.
Mm-hmm.
You're French American. You live in Brooklyn, and you're a jazz pianist, but obviously your approach, which is very solo as well. I mean, you designed an entire system to accompany you and augment what you can do uh, when you perform live. And you've been, without knowing, probably preparing for the pandemic, because you can you can play what you're going to demonstrate today completely on your own from your apartment in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, are you hoping to get back to live performance with this system soon?
Yeah, well, I've been actually fortunate to be doing some live performances of it. Actually, in late August of last year, in the middle of the pandemic, but kind of in one of the troughs of the pandemic in terms of as far as Europe was concerned. There was a festival organized in Florence, in Italy, especially for to try to do something during the pandemic, and I was invited to play Natural Machines in the Boboli Gardens with a gigantic screen. So that was very special. And I also I'm going to be doing it in Lugano in a couple weeks in mid-July.
Oh,
So yeah, there are some opportunities to do it live, but definitely if I hadn't been doing it, in a live stream format, I'd be super starved for live performance during the whole pandemic.
I can imagine. So, your system is using a Disklavier. How would you describe it?
Yeah, so Natural Machines is a project that's almost entirely acoustic sound, and I feel really strongly about that because I've spent, my entire life trying to get good at playing this instrument, the piano, which it's a completely different experience playing an acoustic piano from playing a keyboard or a synth or an organ. And what's really special about the Yamaha Disklavier is it's a completely acoustic piano. It's got hammers and strings and everything that you'd find on an acoustic piano, but it also has the capability of playing all by itself. So it's kind of like it's a modern day player piano where not only is it able to play pre-recorded things, but actually you can just send it commands from your computer in real time and it'll just play them right away.
Right. And then on top of this, you've built a program that is able to listen to the MIDI notes you're playing, or the notes you're playing, interpret them as MIDI, and then do something, send back some new notes to the Disklavier. So the piano plays itself next to you.
Yeah, yeah. That piano in many ways is like the ideal instrument for a project like this because the data regarding what you're playing, if I play like uh, that can be described in so little data. Like literally, you can just say when a note was played, which note it was, and how loudly it was played. In other words, the velocity of the hammer as it's about to hit the string. And that completely encapsulates it. There's nothing else. When you think of a violinist playing a violin, and if you were to really encapsulate what they're doing, you would need infinite amounts of data because I mean, just all the subtleties of how the bow is held, the exact um, maybe humidity of the person's skin, the exact amount that the bow grabs the string as it goes by. I mean, it's just like it'd be impossible, or maybe it's possible, but extremely difficult to capture that accurately in data and to reproduce it on another violin. Piano, I like to say, it's basically like a big typewriter, and we pianists kind of pretend that it's a musical instrument. We're always doing this kind of magic tricks to make it sound like it sings. But so as a result, if I play something, it gets sent as MIDI data to my computer, and then in my computer I've written programs that that listen to what I'm playing and then make decisions in various different ways, because I've written a whole bunch of different algorithms about how to respond. And then the computer sends MIDI commands back to the piano, and then the computer plays those. You know, like for example,
This is fascinating. So it's a piano made by Yamaha called the Disklavier, and people can find this. You can buy a Disklavier. I mean, if you have a large sum of money, you can
they're actually not that
one.
expensive. I mean, I know people who've gotten used ones. The thing is that Yamaha's been making Disklaviers since like 1987, I think, and there have been all kinds of different iterations. The one I have here is a Mark IV, which is from the early 2000s. Right now, the newest ones, this is on loan to me from Yamaha, actually. But right now, the newest ones are called the Inspire, and you know, you can interface with them with like a tablet or your phone. But basically, the point is they've been making them for a long time, and you know, Yamaha is a big company present all over the world, and so one of the great things about the Yamaha Disklavier is that almost anywhere you go, you can find one. So this is actually a project that I've been able to tour all over the world. Thanks to that. And yeah, you know, you can get them pretty cheap. I mean, I know people who've gotten upright Disklaviers for a few $1,000s.
Okay.
Used.
Well, that's good to know. So, so we have Super Collider, which is the software you use to program the way the notes are going to be triggered based on what you play, so that's your accompanying improvisation framework. And then what we just saw a glimpse of is that you also visualize the notes both coming from you and played. So that's done with processing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right.
And well, I suppose I will let you, you know, give a demonstration, because you've given many talks on natural machines, which I'd love for you to give, and then we'll dive maybe a little bit into Super Collider and processing and all the techs that are familiar with the music hack space, but that we have a chance to see in a very particular context from you today.
Great. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just play. So basically, natural machines, I'm always doing free improvisation. Nothing is, none of the musical content is planned ahead, and improvisation is really central to my identity as a musician. So it's super special for me to bring that into this very high-tech context, because my identity as an improviser really has to do with the history of jazz and having played with you know, one of the jazz greats, Lee Konitz, for 12 years. So what I'm trying to say here is it really brings like a very traditional aspect of music making together with something very, you know, more envelope pushing. So every time I play, it's free improvisation, which is what I'm going to do right now. But the algorithms I've written stay the same. So it's like I've written the rules, the way that a piece works, but I haven't written the piece. Maybe to start off with, I'll play with an algorithm called Inversion. In Inversion, everything I play is repeated a little later, but mirrored. So there's an axis of symmetry in the middle of the piano that I've defined, and everything is mirrored on either side of that. So that was Inversion, just again, little free improvisation using that algorithm. And you know, one of the really fun things about this project, Natural Machines, is that it can be different every time. I mean, it is different every time. That's very important to me, to be really improvising with it. If there are any questions about that, you know, please put them in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer. I'm going to play with a different algorithm. This one is called Tremolo, and it's basically it's an algorithm that colors everything I play with tremoloed notes, which just means, you know, rapidly repeating notes. And I'm always kind of amazed at the variety of kind of orchestrational timbre that can come out of the piano with this approach. So free improvisation with my tremolo algorithm. And I see that Sven Wang asks, do you think in a key like C major when you freely improvise with the inversion algorithm? I mean, I've spent a lot of time in my life kind of working on being able to do free improvisation. And yes, you know, thinking about keys and also modulations and ways to move harmony around within a key, not necessarily diatonically, but in many other ways, has been super helpful to me, and I think is really important. Hi to Marila, who's in Flagstaff, Arizona, and Teresa Sewell. Thanks for your comments too. Maybe I'll play one more algorithm from Natural Machines before we return to more of a conversation with Jean-Baptiste. This is called constant motion. So that was my algorithm, Constant Motion from Natural Machines, and again, just a free improvisation with it. So yeah, that was fun.
That was fantastic.
Thank you,
That
Jean-Baptiste.
thank you for your generosity in playing for us today. And so I would love to get more into the weeds of how you think of this. I mean, I'm a software developer by trade, and you know, like this, I can see almost how the algorithm and the composition or the improvisation are so interlinked. And but I'd love to get your account of that. You know, how do you design uh, from an idea that's probably a programmatic idea, but then you improvise on it and maybe you refine the algorithm up to the point where it really hits a stride. I mean, I'd love to get more of your thoughts around that and your process.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of the inspiration for Natural Machines really comes from very ancient ideas about music. So, for instance, I perform the Bach Goldberg variations. I have a program called Bach Goldberg Variations, where I play all the Goldberg variations by Bach. And then after each one, I improvise a variation in response. And that's led me to dive a lot more deeply than I would have otherwise into his music. And the big thing that I understood about him is he gets incredible amounts of mileage from very simple rules that he imposes on himself. So, you know, from these very simple algorithms. I mean, you know, for instance, variation 3 from the Goldberg variations is a canon at the unison. And so all that means is that everything that gets played in this first voice gets repeated a little bit later verbatim in the second voice. So you get something like this. So, you know, hopefully some of you were able to hear how everything that happens once happens exactly the same in the following bar. You know, that you can hear it at the beginning. There's that melody. So that first melody is repeated verbatim in the second bar, while the first voice is now doing something different. But the point is here that this is an exceedingly simple rule that Bach imposed on himself. It's like whatever I write in that first voice has to repeat the same in the second voice a bar later. And if you play the Goldberg variations or you listen to them, you hear immediately how much inspiration he's getting from that rule, even though it's so simple. And the point is that constraints are very powerful in creativity, imposing constraints on yourself. And it almost doesn't matter how sophisticated they are. So in Natural Machines, you know, to answer your question, the thing that I started off with was just programming the simplest rules I could think of. You know, things like canons, so where everything I play is repeated a little bit later. But how much later is it repeated? And can we change that? You know, so for instance, in my algorithm canon of the unison, when I play something, it repeats a little bit later, right? An octave below. But I have some foot pedals under the piano so that I can multiply the amount of time between when I play and the response by 2/3 or 3/2. And this leads to some really interesting metric modulations. And again, these ideas are very simple, but actually to make music with them is not that simple. You know, maybe I'll play for a second with this algorithm, canon of the octave, and you'll see what I mean. And I'll be modifying the amount of time between when I'm playing and the response as I go. So let's go. Okay, so just a really simple example of how you can take a simple rule like a canon at the octave, where literally just everything you play is repeated a little later, an octave away. But by well, even without adding this other element, I think it's extremely how should I put it? Extremely stimulating as an improviser. Like it makes this instrument that I've been playing with my whole life feel totally like a brand new instrument. But by adding this additional constraint of being able to modify the amount of time between when I play and the response, it really makes it much more complex and challenging to play with. And that's a lot of what I'm looking for here is challenge. We need to have hoops to jump through, I think, as improvisers in order to really give our best. Those hoops can be of all kinds of different natures, but we need them. And so, yeah, at first it was trying ideas that I'd seen in Bach's music and in other people's music, and then it slowly evolved to much more complicated ideas like using fractals in music.
Right. So are you still adding new algorithm to your arsenal, or are you exploring the one that you already have?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the pandemic has been exciting in that respect because since the beginning of the pandemic, I've been doing live streams every Monday. And that's in addition to lots of other online performances I've given for other presenters or that I've organized myself and sold tickets to, or workshops I've given. But every single Monday since the beginning of the pandemic, I've given a concert for this kind of evolving community of listeners. And because I'm playing for pretty much the same people every Monday, I always have to come to it with something new. And one of the things I've worked on a lot through the pandemic is new algorithms. So just to give you an example, since I was mentioning using fractals to make music, the last track on the Natural Machines record, which by the way is available for free on YouTube. If you just go to dantepfer.com/naturalmachines, it'll take you right to the YouTube playlist. Yeah, so the last track on Natural Machines is called Fractal Tree, and it's a track where my computer runs through a tree fractal converted to music. And one of the things I did during the pandemic is I changed the tree so that instead of being in 2 dimensions, it's actually in 3 dimensions. And that has a really direct effect on the music because essentially it means that the music's no longer in duple meter. It's no longer like 1, 2, 1, 2, but actually in triple meter. So it's like 1, 2, 3, because of the 3 dimensions of the tree. Maybe I'll show that for a second. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love that. And I have a question just before you start. Maybe
Yeah.
you'll be able to answer it. But like, I really am fascinated by fractals because of the self similarity that expands, and then at the end you have like a shape. We can find this in nature, of course, but also it's in abstract art.
Yeah.
And I think Yanis Xenakis has worked a lot with this kind of structure to imagine small structures like the micro level, and then you have like the meso level, which is the intermediary level, which is a different period of time. A meso element is composed of a lot of micro ones, and then you have the macro element, but each of them can have the exact same structure, but then it applies to a note. I mean, the smallest fragment, I guess in your case, is a note, but what are the different? I mean, how do you self-organize the structure? I'm very curious to see how that works, and especially with this third dimension that
Yeah.
you.
Well, so when you think of a fractal, often we think of it as a visual object, even though, as you rightly point out, it actually has nothing to do with visuals. It's a very abstract idea of self-similarity, right, which can play out in any medium. Certainly doesn't have to be visual. But often we think about fractals as visuals. We think of like the Mandelbrot set, as these beautiful images, or we think of visual analogs in the natural world. For instance, Romanesco, which is a vegetable that is extremely fractal, or the coastline of a country, or mountains can be modeled using fractals very easily. So when I was first playing around with this, I was really fascinated by the tree fractal, which is just taking a branch, or you could call it a trunk, that separates into, in 2 dimensions would be separating into 2 branches. And then you just take that same thing, which like looks like a Y, and you repeat it at these smaller and smaller um, scales. And so I was fascinated by how this looked, and how this incredibly simple idea looked so beautiful and so lifelike. And I asked myself just simply, how can I turn this into music? And I found what I really was determined to do was to turn it into music in a way that was very faithful, so that it's a really faithful representation of the image. I don't want to be doing anything fanciful. I don't want to be changing anything, because the idea is, if we turn it into music, if we change the medium of the fractal, can we still hear the organization as well as we can see it? And I found that basically just by mapping the height of the nodes in the tree to notes, and by just playing the nodes in the tree sequentially but following the hierarchy of the tree, you could really hear the structure well. So basically when you go from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, it just increases the number of nodes, instead of there being 2 branches, and so these 2 main branches that all the nodes come from, you have 3. It's like that. And so in order to read them all, you're going to go, so it's going to have this kind of triplet effect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I look forward to hearing it and seeing it as well.
Okay, here we go. Fractal tree. In 3 dimensions, I should add. There you go.
That was great. Thank you.
I mean, I don't know if you agree, but to me, the we obviously sense the recursive nature of the tree immediately when we look at it. Um, but I really feel like we hear the organization in the notes as well.
Yes, I mean, I could. I'm curious to know what people think on Facebook and YouTube as well. People who are
Mm-hmm.
watching and how they felt the algorithm. To me, it was more clearly generation of notes following that structure, and it was clear that as you go further up the tree, that the density of the notes was much higher.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the natural distribution of leaves on a
Mm-hmm.
tree.
Exactly. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have way more leaves than you have branches
Mm-hmm.
as you get further closer to the tree. So this was visible as well as hearable for sure. You have this grapes of I don't know, for lack of a better word, of notes coming um, as the tree was um, parcouru. I'm not sure how to say that in.
Oh, it was being yeah, uh, followed or yeah. That's that's a really hard one to translate.
Yeah, there's
Uh,
definitely a word for that, but not in the sentence as I structured it. But
yeah.
uh,
Jean-Baptiste is saying, you know, as the tree, as the nodes of the tree are being followed in the hierarchy by the computer, you can hear these differences in density, right?
that's right. Yeah, that's right. And no, it's fascinating. The contrast with the other algorithms you had is that this one is much more standalone. Like I could see that you had some controls over some parameters which changed, but it's not responding to the notes you played. It's rather responding to some high level parameters on
Yeah,
which.
that's exactly right. Yeah, actually, it's the only one in all of Natural Machines that's not directly responding to what I play, and I just felt like it would be really fun to have something that comes out of left field and where basically I'm just responding to it, right? I mean, I am so basically, shall we say, I am controlling the narrative of of how the tree develops because that's what's amazing with these fractal trees is you know you depending on the angle between the branches, you really tell a story, right? You can start with it all scrunched up and then end with it really expansive and open. And so I'm controlling that narrative. But as I'm controlling that, then I'm also just responding completely freely, you know, on the melodica, or sometimes I sing with it. So yeah, it's a really different interaction from pretty much all the other algorithms where it's like all a reflection of what I'm playing.
Yeah, and we could see at the end that the tree got very narrow, so with constraints that were well very specific to its distribution and evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm curious to talk about the graphics as well. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
big part of it. Do you see? Do you think you're inspired yourself by the graphics as you improvise? That that the visual representation of the notes that you design yourself is feeding back um, into what you play,
Yeah,
or is it
absolutely.
independent
Yeah.
and you
And
can
you
see
know,
it more as a support?
it's something that I've observed is quite different in different people because I've had friends come over and play around with this and people find it really fascinating. But for some people, having visuals while they're playing is just a distraction and all they want to do is close their eyes. And for others, seeing the images that you're creating by playing and that you know essentially you're painting in real time is really inspiring. And I'm in that group. I love looking at the images while I'm playing because it, you know, I mean, it's one thing to be sitting at the piano and to want to create good sounding music. That's what I'm used to. But this additional idea of not only do I want it to sound good, but I would love for it to look good too. And maybe if I play this particular kind of thing, it's going to look cool visually. I find that really interesting. I mean, basically anything that takes me out of my comfort zone and makes me think about music differently, I really welcome.
Yeah, it makes me think of people with a synesthesia
Yeah,
who can see music as it's being played, and often it's a source of inspiration for them because they can, if they can see a symphony, then when they see something, it reflects back onto what they could hear from it.
yeah, it
Um,
just augments the experience. I mean, synesthesia is definitely an important word in this project because everything that you see is like directly an expression of the music. There's no kind of like interpretive element exactly. I mean, obviously I've chosen colors and ways to represent the music, but every kind of data point is directly reflecting a note that's being played, and um, so the idea is that it's not distracting from the music; it's actually augmenting the experience of that same information. You're talking about algorithms that that I find inspiring visually. Just really quickly, I want to show one of my favorite ones, which is called Triad Sculpture, and it's one where um, I am generating 3D shapes from every one of the harmonies that I play in my left hand, and it's all generated in real time. But basically, what I'm doing is thinking about these harmonies in terms of the frequencies between the notes, and playing with tuning systems as well. Because if you play, a major triad, for example, um, you can think of it in equal temperament, or you could think of it in just intonation. In just intonation, the ratios between the frequencies are whole numbers, and in equal temperament, they're not. Um, and so I don't want to get into all of that right now, but the point is that every time I play a harmony, you get an image generated, and I find them very beautiful. And this is one of the ones that's most inspiring to me when I play with it. I mean, I'll just play like a 40-second version of it.
right. Thank you.
That was Triad Sculpture. Just again, I'm just improvising freely with all of these, so they're different every time. And that was just super short version of
This
playing with
is
that
this is,
algorithm.
this is great. Well, we can see a lot of love for your work on Facebook, especially where you also have a lot of live stream there, so quite the following. Uh, and I was thinking about the graphics, being also an important point of contact with your audience, because like the piano itself doesn't need to be explained, because we've seen people playing the piano. We don't need to have visuals associated to it, but algorithms are different. they do something that has no physical evidence in the world. And even if you play on Disklavier, where there's actually the physical note being played, it's missing the hands, it's missing the human and the muscle and the intention. So, so do you think of those visuals also as a way to connect with the audience and a way to give them some cues about what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. That's in some ways maybe the most important aspect of this is to try to convey the kind of underlying structure of the music to the audience. Um, if I think, for example, of one of these pieces by Bach I was mentioning earlier that has an algorithmic element underlying it, it takes a lot of kind of experience and time to understand exactly what's going on. And I think there's something really wonderful about making that underlying structure clear in the moment. And certainly, I think the way my audiences have reacted to this is very different from how it would have been if if there weren't a visual element. Actually, the project started without visuals. I started working on this like 6 years ago or something like that, maybe 7 years at this point. And for a long time, for years, I didn't have any visuals, and I still thought it was super, super cool. I was so excited about it. But then when I started adding visuals, I think it took on a whole other dimension. And in particular, for example, you can see that children love it. Children are just like absolutely fascinated by the visuals, and that's something that I find really special. As somebody who's made this kind of sophisticated music his whole life, it's really fun to be able to connect with a wider audience.
Yeah, and it must be very empowering for children, I suppose, as well, and anyone who gets into improvisation and creativity, that they also control not only the sound but also the images.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah, my image seems to be gone, so I'm not sure if my bandwidth is holding up, but
Well, at least we can hear your voice, so
oh,
that's
good,
the
good.
important thing.
So I'm sorry about that. So yeah, we're getting well close to the end of this live stream conversation. I'm inviting anyone who has questions for Dan to put them in the chat, and if we have some time, we can explore that in more detail. And in the meantime, I have one question for you, Dan, which is, you know, you created a universe with this that you can certainly explore for a lifetime. There's these mini machines that you create are fantastic, and you can continue to work with them on your own. You can also work with others, imagining that beyond the Disklavier, there's actually other, maybe more difficult ways of creating notes that maybe people will have to play live. You can the note that you send to Disklavier could be put on a score that someone can follow, for example. So you could
Yeah.
play with an entire symphonic orchestra.
I've
That
actually
response.
experimented with that. I wrote a symphonic suite in 2015, where two of the movements are actually directly taken from these algorithms. They actually come. Well, one of them comes from an improvisation I did with one of the algorithms that then transcribed and then orchestrated, and the other actually comes from the tree fractal I just played. But I think you're right. There's so much potential there. I feel like I'm just starting to scratch the surface here.
And did you have a sense at this point of what kind of direction you want this to take, and I mean, as a musician, it's okay to at some point want to completely change and do something new, but do you feel you have like and I hope the answer is yes, because I want you to continue to explore this because it's really interesting. But yeah, are you interested in continuing as a system for yourself, or also including others and trying to find a solution to sort of work with technology and with others as well?
Yeah, I am interested in incorporating others. For example, my friend Dana Stevens, who's a great saxophonist, he also plays iwi, the electronic wind instrument, electronic wind instrument. And he came over and we were taking MIDI commands from his iwi as he was playing, and having the piano respond in real time. There's also a lot of potential with doing MIDI tracking of audio signals. You know, like when you play the Disklavier, you get MIDI information directly. But I've written some pitch trackers where I can sing into it or play the saxophone, and it'll recognize the pitch that I'm singing or playing and immediately respond to that. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential in terms of involving other people. I also really want to involve other people on the visual aspect because, you know, I'm an amateur programmer, and you know, I've devoted my life to making music, and I love visuals, but it's certainly not something I've spent as much time on as somebody who's been, you know, deep into computer graphics since they were a kid and have done nothing but that their whole life. And I think what would be interesting would be to give somebody the data in real time and for them to make their own visual world from it. So yeah, that's something I want to definitely keep exploring. You know, the pandemic, I think, has been a bit of has gotten in the way of doing things with other people in general. Although I have been championing this technology called Jacktrip, which enables people to play with other people through the internet. But you know, another thing about how, you know, you're talking about musicians wanting to, or artists wanting to do something different at some point. A big part of how I kind of conduct my artistic life is to try to keep it as diverse as possible. You know, in other words, Natural Machines is like a super important project for me, and I want to do it as much as I can. But at the same time, in September, I'm playing a piano quintet that I wrote that's really like in part of the classical world, with a string quartet in New York. And we're also doing one of the Mozart concertos, the Mozart 449 in E flat. And or another thing, you know, I'm in September, I'm playing a duo with the great jazz singer Cécile McLaurin-Salvant. And, you know, my feeling, generally speaking, about creation is that the more you kind of go out under the leaves of the tree, you know, the more you go kind of reaching out, the more you have to reinforce your roots. So I guess what I'm trying to say is because there's so much variety in what I do, when I come back to Natural Machines, I tend to just be super excited and just want to keep developing it more. So hopefully I'll stay excited about it for a long time.
Right. We have a question for you from Sven Wong.
Mm-hmm.
A synesthetic question. Do you feel that simpler harmonic sounding triads intervals also look simpler visually and vice versa? Can you sometimes see dissonance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's really what that algorithm I just showed you, the Triad Sculpture, is all about. It's really about parsing that difference. So for example, there is, wait, can you see this? Can't tell if it's coming up. Oh yeah, right, it's not, but it will now. Yeah, there you go. So that's a major triad in just intonation. So in other words, this is ratios 4 to 5 to 6 between the frequencies of the tones. And here's a minor triad. So already you can see a difference between major and minor, right? So major, we hear the simplicity and the consonance of the sound, and we can see it too. Minor is ratios 10 to 12 to 15, and so it's a more complicated relationship between the frequencies of the tones, and that's reflected directly in both the sound and the visual. And then, of course, if I do something like this, we get something that's far, far more complex. Or if I do, you know, like, then you can really see the density building there. So yeah, there very much is a direct relationship between the complexity of sound and the ratios between the frequencies, which is what I'm mapping here. So you're going to immediately see that in the complexity of the shape. Of course, I should say that, as I mentioned earlier, here I'm also playing with the difference between just intonation and equal temperament. So that adds another layer to this.
Right, and to the question to see dissonance, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, for any experienced musician, uh, consonance and dissonance is a very deeply emotional thing. There's a very strong feeling about the amount of dissonance, the amount of consonance. This is a sliding scale. It's not like an either or. And so for me, dissonance is very emotional. And anything that's emotional in some way you can see. Anything that you can feel, you can see. I think um, it just kind of depends how your mind's eye works. But certainly for me, I think for me it's more of a feeling. But I have friends who are deeply synesthetic, where they'll literally see um, particularly bright colors or whatever when something's dissonant. But it depends. Everybody's synesthesia works in different ways too.
That's right. Wonderful. Well, I think we have run out of time for today, but thank you very much. Thank you everyone for tuning in on Facebook and YouTube, and you will be able to watch again this stream on both channels. We're gonna keep them there for others to see. Um, Thank you, Dan, very much
My
for
pleasure,
this.
Jean-Baptiste. Thanks for having me.
It was a great exploration of your work, and it's good to see all the intention and all the um, yeah, all the work you put into it, and it really touches people in a fantastic way. So
Thanks so much.
yeah, we hope to see you again soon, and I hear you have some projects as well that go beyond performing about software. So we'd love to hear more about that when you're ready to tell the world.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted. Yeah, there's going to be a virtual reality version of Natural Machines coming out soon. And I'm also working hard on an app that makes communicating with other people through the internet with extremely low latency. So low enough latency to play music together. Um, but that's easy to use. I've been working on that for a while with a collaborator, Anton Runoff. So that should be coming out relatively soon. Because I should say that the technology I've been using through the pandemic to do this is called Jack Trip, and it's very hard to use. So this is going to be like the version that's as easy to use as Zoom,
Right.
and I'm excited about that coming out.
Wow, that sounds exciting. And many parts of the world are still in some form of lockdown. So I have no doubt that it will be a very useful piece of software.
Yeah, and even outside of lockdown, I think if you want to try out something new that you wrote with your bassist friend, who lives a few miles away or even like 500 miles away, it's extremely useful to be able to just do a quick call and play together rather than having to take the subway or drive or
Absolutely.
physically get together.
Yeah, and if people haven't seen you performing with Jack Trip, it's really impressive. The live streams you do in collaboration, and the fact that you can be so in tune with one another, where you and I on Zoom now, sometimes the delay is such that we don't know if the sentence finished, and it happens probably a few seconds before. But you managed to play completely on time with someone that's in a different city. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's
that
it's
takes
amazing. It's a real gift, and I'm so glad that it's been possible through the pandemic. Because even 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been possible.
right. Well, on these positive notes of technology helping us to connect, uh, we will wish everybody and you tonight a great day and weekend ahead. And we look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thank you so much, Jean-Baptiste.
Thank
Okay.
you.